Mark Carney has booked an emergency meeting with Donald Trump coming off Donald Trump's comments that he might be breaking down the CUSMA USMCA agreement. It looks like Canada and Mexico will be competing against each other just to try and get a deal done with the United States. Maybe taking on the largest economy in the world wasn't the best idea, but of course the elbows up crowd needs to double down on their decisions, and they're freaking out about Wayne Gretzky when they should be focused on what we just found out about Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons might be confirming all of our theories that they are allegedly working as an immigration agency and not a real business. This needs to be called out. We will be getting into that. We just found out that 52% of Canadian businesses are outsourcing their work to foreign countries. Surprise, surprise, a lot of it is India. Not only is there a trade war with the United States, we have an indigenous population who wants to shut down every single project in Canada. And Canada's getting called out by American pundits saying your government is funding the entire workforce, and we are seeing that is evidently true. Canada doesn't realize how bad the fundamentals are. We need a deal, and there is a lot to talk about in today's video, so let's get into it.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the future of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico free trade agreement is uncertain, with less than a year left before renegotiations begin.
It's just an ongoing thing. It expires in about a year. And we'll either let it expire or we'll maybe work out another deal with Mexico and Canada. But look, Mexico and Canada have taken advantage of the United States, like just about every other country, in all fairness. It's not them, I'm not blaming them. But every country, because we had stupid people running our country. We had a lot of stupid people running. That's why we have $38 trillion in debt. But the beautiful thing about the tariffs is we'll start paying off that debt.
Obviously, we can't say for certain because we don't know exactly what Trump is thinking. But it seems like CUSMA, USMCA is done. We are going to end up with bilateral trade agreements, and that's why the 51st state talk continues to heat up. But here we have some more theories to get into about the trade negotiations. Let's pop into here.
And with me now is CTV News U.S. political analyst Eric Ham. Eric, thanks.
Eric Ham, wildly Democratic.
So much for joining us, and I wanted to get your thoughts on those comments that we heard right there from Trump, saying he might either let the deal expire or be replaced with a new deal between Canada and Mexico, or separately. Your thoughts on what we heard from the U.S. president?
Well, these are all just not only negotiating tactics, but they're also part of Donald Trump's policy of cruelty, where he certainly wants to make things as uncomfortable as possible, specifically for Canada. And what we're seeing here is while the CUSMA public hearings are actually taking place in Washington right now, not far from where we are. In fact, today marks the second day that those public meetings will be happening. What we have also heard from the U.S. trade representative, the person who is actually in charge of overseeing those public meetings, he's also indicated that Donald Trump is signaling the possibility of revising, but more likely actually exiting the agreement. And
so one thing he said earlier there, the policy of cruelty. He's just trying to bully poor Canada. Oh, poor Canada. Well, when we get into the stories that we're going to get into today, on top of everything that we cover on this channel all the time, it's so funny to watch these Americans be like, look, the Democrats, to be fair, Trump is just so mean to Canada. Canada's doing nothing wrong, and now they're getting hurt in the process. First of all, Canada's doing a lot wrong, and we need to hold the government accountable. We need to hold Canadian businesses accountable. There are so many problems that are being done domestically that are not part of Donald Trump's policy of cruelty. So the idea that Canadians continue to watch this mainstream media and then they hear this American call it the policy of cruelty and they're like, see, he's trying to hurt us.
Of course, what we know and the reason for that is the president is seeking maximum leverage from Canada. And we don't know what that leverage point actually is, but we know when President Donald Trump came into office, he made abundantly clear his goal is to make Canada a state of the United States. And so if Donald Trump believes that this leverage combined with continuing to make it difficult, particularly on trade,
51st state mentioned,
and other economic policies, can move Canada in his direction. That's what Donald Trump is attempting to do. And even though these meetings will overwhelmingly showcase not only the importance, but also how beneficial this agreement has been for decades to both sides of the border, Donald Trump isn't listening to that right now at all.
He's about to get into some pretty funny economic theories here, and I want the Americans to weigh in and the Canadians because, look, I'm not cheering on what I'm about to get into because it's not good for Canada, but just economically, what he says, I don't think really makes sense.
And we've heard the U.S. president say that before, not just specifically about Canada and Mexico, but that many countries, if not all countries, had been taking advantage of the United States, particularly when it came to trade. Now, if Trump does attempt to split the deal and tries to renegotiate separately with Canada and Mexico, what could that mean for the Canadian side of the deal?
Not just the Canadian side, but I think what we will see is just a much, much worse agreement, both for Canada, for the United States, and also for Mexico. What we have seen over 60 years has been economic integration where both sides of the border have benefited immensely. In fact, if you look at the auto industry, which in the United States accounts for nearly 10% of GDP, so we're talking about a massive economic engine. Right now, we know that billions of dollars a day in parts and manufacturing cross the U.S. and Canada. And so if the president is now looking at reshaping that agreement, we could see where the deal could have an adverse impact not only on workers, but also on companies. And
so this is the part that he's getting into, which I think doesn't actually make any sense. He said 60 years of deepening economic integration, which, don't get me wrong, as a Canadian, I'm happy that we were able to integrate economically with the United States, the largest economy in the world. To me, I'm glad Canada was able to prosper by getting closer to the fire that is America's economy. Thanks for keeping us warm. However, from an actual business standpoint, all of these companies only moved to Canada, not because Canada had some sort of edge on America when it came to manufacturing, but it made more money for the companies at the time. What happened is those jobs left the United States and then went to Canada. Canadians got more jobs. The manufacturing base in auto continued to increase in Canada. And yes, they do cross the border multiple times because some factories are over here, some factories are over there. But the plan that America is trying to do is bring all of those jobs back to America. So yes, when he talks about pain and how people will be hurt, there will be a transition period that will make things slightly more difficult. But America has the ability, has the capacity, and they have the flexibility and, of course, a dynamic economy to be able to absorb these jobs and reindustrialize, in which case now more Americans have good, high-paying manufacturing jobs. And I understand there's going to be a lot of nuance involved here, and I am certainly not cheering on Canadians losing jobs. I want Canada to do well. The only way it's going to be able to do well is if we hold our government accountable. The fact that he's trying to make it sound bad that America will be getting more jobs back, which they already had originally, and they will be winning them because he doesn't like Trump, just goes to show how deep TDS is, that this guy is cheering against his own country. I'm not cheering against my own country. I want Canada to do well. I want Canada to be thriving. But once again, we can't keep blaming Donald Trump. We have to blame our leaders. Speaking of, Carney to meet Trump and Sheinbaum tomorrow in D.C. This is a last-minute meeting that was just booked. It just became official, and this is a big deal because they guys haven't met in months, and we can see now more than ever, if CUSMA, USMCA, is to break down, we'll be competing against Mexico for manufacturing and trade, and from a leverage perspective, Mexico is already passing Canada when it comes to overall trade. The two nations remain in a tariff trade war. Negotiations to end it were abruptly halted in October when Trump took issue with an ad spot produced by Ontario's government. The ad, which ran in the US during the World Series, featured former President Ronald Reagan criticizing these tariffs, and Carney has since apologized, and Canada was ready to restart talks whenever the White House returns to the table. U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra has expressed doubt a deal will be reached before the new year. I agree. I too am very doubtful a trade deal will be reached. I don't think there will be a deal reached before the CUSMA negotiations. I straight up think they are going to break down that entire agreement, and there will be two bilateral trade agreements where Canada and Mexico will be trying to undercut each other just to try and get the best position. So what can Canada do to try and protect and help Canadians? We can tell our government to hold the businesses accountable accountable and smarten up. Tim Hortons, Canada's most Canadian brand, which I don't even think is remotely Canadian at this point, has been lobbying and campaigning to the government to ask them to raise the cap on foreign workers so that Tim Hortons can hire more foreign workers to grow the business. Yeah, that's great for Canada. Let's get into it.
However, the official opposition renewing a call to axe the temporary foreign worker program.
I'm sorry, I can't believe that there aren't Canadians across the country that won't do these jobs.
This after CBC News revealed coffee giant Tim Hortons is pushing to hire more.
Look at the staff. This is so funny. They're just using random B-roll. Look at the staff. Boom, 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 boom. Random B-roll. So Tim Hortons, Canada's most Canadian brand. Meanwhile, not Canadian staffed, barely Canadian owned. Well, not owned at the corporate level, but even the franchisees at this point are barely Canadian. And it's not even Canadian supplied for the most part. Well, we actually get our eggs from Canadian farms. Sure. Okay, Tim Hortons.
Or temporary foreign workers, or TFWs. In late October, it held lobbying meetings with Liberal, Bloc Québécois, and Conservative MPs, making the case to renew expiring
and Conservative MPs
work permits faster, according to former Immigration Minister Mark Miller. The Bloc's Alexis
In my personal opinion, Mark Miller's actions and comments make it look like he could be one of the top traitors in the Canadian government. And I don't like throwing that word around because during these U.S. negotiations, everybody's been calling everybody a traitor, but this guy's actions have been selling out Canada.
Duceppe says in July they were looking to raise the existing cap on TFWs in his writing from 10 to 20% of employees.
It's actually very predictable that they would request higher caps, easier ability to hire temporary foreign workers. I'm not surprised at all.
But caps are not the main concern for this professor. She says foreign workers are prone to exploitation by employers, and that's where Ottawa needs to act.
We need a much more robust system for ensuring that employment standards are upheld.
Ottawa did make changes in August of 2024, but Tim Hortons' lobbying efforts go back further. In May of last year, a company representative wrote a letter to Mark Miller, released under an access to information request, asking him to bump the cap up from 20 to 30%.
So that was before Donald Trump. This was before the trade war. Also, Canada has a youth unemployment crisis. 10 years ago, if you walked into a Tim Hortons, almost every single person in there would have been Canadian. Maybe one or two would have been an immigrant, but almost all of them would have been Canadian. It wasn't even viewed as a bad job. People saw it as a normal and good thing to work at Tim Hortons because it was a well-respected Canadian brand, but they have spent 10 years destroying their legacy, becoming an immigration agency where their goal is to only bring in temporary foreign workers because they know they can abuse them. They know they will put up with lower working standards. They know that they get subsidies when it comes to hiring these people. They know that it's better for business to have these people who come from third world nations that you can treat poorly instead of just making the working conditions acceptable for the Canadians. And then the large soulless corporations use their patented technique of attacking you emotionally, calling you all of the names, even though it all comes down to their profit.
Arguing the cost of being in business continues to rise and it is more challenging to hire in many markets. Tim Hortons says most of its 100,000 employees are local hires, but it needs TFWs to fill gaps in smaller and rural communities.
I do not know how that could be possible that most of their staff could be local hires. When any of the last times I went to Tim Hortons, I did not see one Canadian in there, and that's in the cities where I would have gone. That being said, it's been well over a year since I've been in a Tim Hortons. I will not give them a penny of my money, and I am begging you, Canadians or Americans who are coming up to Canada and you're visiting and you want to try Tim Hortons, please don't even give them 1 cent. It's not good. It's a bad corporation. They should not have any Canadian support. I'm sick of them doubling down on this Canadian branding as they are an immigration agency subverting wages, workforce, social cohesion. You are getting horrible service when it comes to Tim Hortons. Like everything they are doing as an institution is way more destructive to Canadian communities than anything Donald Trump's done.
As an employer, I have a vision. I need people. And they're here as a temporary foreign worker.
Hey, Jamie, shut up. If your business can't make money, I don't care about your dream. You don't get to bring in third world immigrants, become an immigration agency just so you can make money as a franchisee owner of Tim Hortons. This is nonsense, and this talking point needs to end now. Speaking of, liberal cringe alert. There is our high alert warning to get into this next tweet here. We got this response here from journalist and media personality Sarbjit Kaur. Maybe we could train MPs to understand the basics of how businesses are run. By her logic, Air Canada should just train random applicants on how to fly a plane. No big deal. And what is she responding to here? Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner was responding to this story where this business said, I might have to shut down. Immigration cuts push Saskatchewan restaurant to the brink. Owner of Indian Kitchen in Lloydminster fears of loss of skilled chefs. And of course, the article is written by Aishwarya Dutta. Well, Aishwarya Dutta and Sarbjit Kaur seem like they're on the same side. The businesses are not entitled to exist. You don't get to become an immigration agency because you want to serve slop to the local Saskatchewan community. We've got enough slop. There is slop all around us. You're not entitled to come to Canada and then bring everybody over and start a restaurant. And the fact that this journalist and political pundit for some reason thinks drawing the conclusion that not being able to find local Indian slop chefs and not be able to train them is the same thing as struggling to train people to be airline pilots. So airline pilots, Indian slop chefs. Yeah, those to me are the exact same. Of course, Canadians won't call that out. They won't call out Tim Hortons. They won't call out the Indian restaurants, all of those immigration agencies, which is making life more expensive, which is breaking down social cohesion, which is breaking down all of the social services, and also misallocating resources where money would otherwise be spent. But they had to focus on the big stuff, that Canadians react after Wayne Gretzky photographed golfing with President Donald Trump. So now Canadians are up in arms. They are so mad because Donald Trump, everybody knows, is so bad that you can't even golf with him. But if Tim Hortons, the Canadian institution, wants to bring in hundreds of thousands of foreign people into Canada, that's fine. And another example of Canadian businesses hollowing out Canada from the inside that has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It was actually Canadian YouTuber Jack Chappell who brought this stat forward, but this is an analysis of businesses outsourcing work in Canada the first quarter of 2025. Proportion of businesses outsourcing work. Over half, 52% of businesses reported they have outsourced tasks, projects, or short contracts in the last 12 months. Just under 1/5 of businesses that have outsourced work use third-party digital platforms, applications, or websites to do so. So, of course, not all of the outsourcing is being done overseas, but I think we can assume a lot of it is, especially since we've seen a lot of jobs from major corporations being moved directly overseas and them outsourcing the actual jobs, not just the piecework like they're talking about here. By the way, this is from Stats Canada, the government website. Speaking of government, we are seeing that Canada's economic fundamentals are so bad that the only reason Canada is staying afloat is because of government spending. And here we have American Peter St. Onge, I will also link his channel down below, he makes good videos, calling out Canada for being one giant useless bureaucracy, and it's why Canadian companies don't even invest inside of Canada. And when he compares some of the numbers to the US and public sector jobs, it's actually insane.
Canada is barreling toward serfdom as a new study finds government workers increased 950,000 since 2015. In U.S. population terms, that's 9 million additional government workers in just 9 years.
Canada had 3 industries. We had immigration, we had real estate, and we had government spending, and they all propped each other up. We hardly had any sort of other major Canadian industries outside of industries which were kept alive by us having deals with the United States.
Meanwhile, a universal basic income threatens to bankrupt the country while turning Canada's open borders into a global free-for-all. Now, 950 brings total government workers in Canada to almost 1 in 4. So in U.S. terms, that's 40 million government workers, slightly fewer than the Soviet Union. So if you are Canadian and not working for the government, congratulations, there are not many of you left.
And one little thing, one small detail, which I think is important. The government workers does include healthcare, of course, so that, I mean, it's still public spending and they're still public employees, which again is not economically productive, but it is a detail that's worth mentioning because yes, the US has 24 million estimated public employees. The comparative number in Canada, like he said, is actually probably closer to 45 million employees. So yes, almost double the public employees in Canada compared to the US.
That is a problem. Because, of course, government workers produce nothing. They are pure parasites on the back of the workers who pay their salary. And it means a Canadian family working 2 jobs will soon be paying the entire salary of a bureaucrat on top of the pensioner they already support.
I just want to make it clear, I don't not like all government employees. I actually do think it's important for nations to have public employees and therefore to be a functioning government. I'm not some like libertarian anarchist who's like, we could shut it all down and privatize everything. I do want there to be public sector employees. I do want there to be a functioning government we can trust, who's efficient. I just don't want this bloat where Canada is spending its way into oblivion by only hiring public sector's employees to keep the economy alive, which doesn't even exist as soon as you eliminate immigration.
Plus hordes of open border migrants who never paid into Canada's welfare state but are very happy to cash out. It's a lot of straws on a camel who is already putting groceries on the credit card. And it puts context on a leaked report last year by the RCMP, Canada's FBI, warning of a, quote, groundswell of discontent as Canadian living standards decline. In case you're curious, what happens when a government has given up? It buys more guns. The fun does not stop there. In May, a Liberal senator introduced a bill to push a universal basic income, an unconditional monthly cash payment to, quote, all persons over the age of 17.
There's a legitimate chance that Canada does get some form of universal basic income. So already, basically, our economy is based on public sector employees and immigration. And now Canada wants universal basic income. And this is why when all the 51st state talk heats up, it's like, I don't know how Canada survives Canada. I don't know how Canada survives our own decisions, and there will be anything else left other than pieces for the U.S. to come pick up and say, look, you're just going to be part of us now, guys.
So open borders and free monthly cash, what could possibly go wrong? Note that since the 90s, Canada's foreign-born population doubled to nearly 1 in 4. It's actually 1 in 3 under age 14, as in future Canadian voters. The last 3 years alone, Canada took in nearly 3 million migrants. In U.S. terms, that's 27 million migrants. And roughly 90% of Canadian population growth is...
What do you think, Americans? How would you feel about 27 million migrants in 3 years?
now migrants. Toss on a UBI, and in a generation, regular Canadians will be a rounding error. All this matters because Canada is, in theory, a democracy, and both government workers and migrants vote overwhelmingly left. So if a quarter of voters work for government and another third are foreign-born, Canada is approaching the point where it becomes statistically impossible for a small government conservative to ever win an election.
He's right. We're about to hit critical mass where there will be a point where it's statistically impossible to ever have a conservative government in Canada. We're not there yet. The last election was so close. But as he said, if these trends continue, it will just be statistically impossible to ever get a conservative government ever again, in which case Canada will cease to exist in 10 years and the demographics are already not looking great. And it's because we refuse to just tell people to shut up. And I think we got to say, hey guys, shut up, because there's not much you could do when somebody tells you to shut up. And we keep seeing these articles. First Nation chief says Ring of Fire development is not going to happen. So this is a major development, a resource development that could be massively productive for Ontario, who's losing jobs, for Canada, who is absolutely getting smoked right now. But for some reason, the idiots in government refuse to just tell them to shut up. Guys, I'm pitching the deal. Ford F-150s, Lariats, 2026, to all of them. And then they just have to shut up. As you can see, Canada continues to get hollowed out by international forces done by Canadian agencies, Canadian companies, Canadian governments. I think it's time that Canadians accept the fact that if we do not immediately shut all of this down, if we do not completely do a 180 on the direction that we are headed, Canada will not exist in 10 years, and we should be prepared prepared to actually become the 51st state. And hey, maybe some people don't have a problem with that, but if you made it this far in the video, you absolutely rock. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're trying to get these videos out in front of more people. We are trying to grow the channel. If you want to support the channel, you can do it through the link down below. You can also do it directly through YouTube. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.